Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Reaction. We have got so much news to cover with you today. With me to talk about it all, David Rand and Kyle Mack. We got Evan back there on the buttons. I'm Joe Sheehan. Today we're going to discuss the Republican presidential debates that just occurred in Milwaukee. We're also going to cover the largest interview in the history of the world, Tucker and Trump on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, and a bunch more. But first, we're actually going to go to Maui, where President Joe Biden has finally visited, and he had this to say to the people of Lahaina.
I don't want to compare difficulties, but we have a little sense, Jill and I, what it's like to lose a home.
Pure fiction.
Years ago, now 15 years ago, I was in Washington doing Meet the Press. It was a sunny Sunday, and lightning struck at home on a little lake. It's outside of our home, not a lake, a big pond, and hit a wire and came up underneath our home into the heating duct, the air conditioning duct. To make a long story short, I almost lost my wife.
It's false. No way. Not this time.
My 67 Corvette and my cat.
It's so bad. Okay, so all the inconsistency here are so frustrating because it's sunny, but there's lightning, but he's in DC, but it's there. He actually claims in another part that he actually made it there to watch the thing. I mean, and it's like the small fire in his kitchen that goes from a wire into a duct into the kitchen, and then the moral repugnancy to then say, I'm not going to compare suffering, but this is pretty much the same thing, is so gross. I mean, it's just like, geez, man, like kids died and your house got a little burnt one time. It's not the same.
Well, it's one of, he's known for this. Like he's known for lying about like his college record and like all this stuff. Like he's been doing this since he's been a senator since like for 40 years. He's been lying like this, but it's the age of the internet, right? Where everybody can just be like, what? And then put out a video like this, right?
Exactly. This is entirely par for the course for what we should expect from Joe Biden in terms of just like kind of making shit up. But the consequence of it and the juxtaposition of how inane his story is versus the absolute devastation that an entire community of people have gone through is, I think, the real shocking thing. And Hawaiians have every right to be upset at this. Like, all he had to do was show up there and say, this is incredibly tragic, and I'm so sorry, and we're going to do everything that we can to help you. But instead, I almost lost my Corvette and my cat.
Yeah.
Like, dude.
So cringy.
It demonstrates exactly how out of touch he is and exactly how his brain is not functioning to the extent that he could even conceive of the fact that is just completely inappropriate.
And the crazy moment we're in is that he is so much like this so often that it feels like elder abuse just to point it out. Yes. And have a standard that the president, the most powerful person on the planet, should be able to know where he is and read a room. And this guy's got the nuclear codes and he's driving us to World War III. Like this is where we're at. Anyways, all right, so enough elder abuse. We got some other facts with the Maui fires here that I do want to go through because we did cover this last week and it was just real quick. AP came out with a brand new story. We'll put it on the links. You got to check it out. It does it's excellent reporting. I mean, fantastic reporting, establishing the facts of what happened in Maui. We have the fire was started by a down pipeline that was confirmed. AP actually tracked down the guy.
Power line, not pipeline?
Power line. Did I say pipeline?
Yes,
I'm
you
sorry.
did.
Power line.
Which goes right into everything that Michael Schellenberger was reporting, right?
Yeah, and that we talked about too, right? And that this is what the lawsuit's about. They actually tracked down the guy who reported the initial fire, right? So that's very well said. And it definitely, for the right-wingers who are like, this must be arson, use this moment to just get some perspective. It isn't necessarily always the thing that fits your political books. Second, the roads were blockaded, right? And this is something you said. And apparently they were blockaded in order to prevent other down power lines from potentially damaging vehicles. And that's why they were blockaded. But then when the fire was happening, there wasn't good enough communication about how they needed, what the priority was. Additionally, that it still doesn't check out exactly why they were still blockaded while the lines were down, because the power was off at that point. And that's why so many things didn't work, like the cell phone towers and stuff like that. But there is a very disturbing part of this where the people who did obey the traffic laws in this case and didn't go around the cones in the blockaded areas, they are the ones who died, and the people who went around are the ones who survived. Very scary, very, very crazy.
Wow.
something went drastically wrong there. There's some more stuff on the fire emergency response as being part of the broadcast system that was also released, but it still isn't clear why people in the all hazard broadcast system, why people were generally trained with these sirens to be tsunami, not fire, that it wasn't, that might have just been an oversight, or it might have been like the impression that the administrators had about the effects of the sirens. It might not have been the actual expectation of the public. So there's still a lot to be done there, and a lot of accountability to still be had. It's still open whether or not the water guy actually did or didn't release the water on time, and why. That's still unknown.
Is the water guy, you mean like the guy that was like the one water policy?
Yeah,
type of thing?
yeah. He was the guy in charge of the water,
Yeah.
and which is weird that you have a guy in charge of the water.
Which
but
you've probably seen the viral video of the guy talking about those too. It's like,
I think we mentioned it briefly too, but it's still open, and a major component to the story that needs to be developed, because if the guy didn't release the water, why, and what hesitation would that, why in God's name would you not, and then hold that guy accountable?
Yeah, lots of questions around that. And if you do want to know more about the conversation that we've already had about this, looking at some of the conspiracy theories that were circulating and kind of trying to apply a little bit of rational thought to those, the previous episode is the place for you to check out. We go into a lot of detail. For now, let's switch gears and let's go to the Republican presidential debate in Milwaukee and break down what exactly happened, who we thought were the victors of the day and the maybe victims of the day. Kyle, do we have videos to watch here?
we do have videos. Actually, do we want to break down like winners and losers kind of a thing? Like, do we have winners and losers that we want to talk about here?
Well, I think the
initially
overall dynamic, and I'm curious if you guys agree with me. The overall dynamic was Vivek versus candidates who sounded like they're from 2012.
Maybe even earlier, like the 90s.
Yeah, right. It was very strange. I mean that both from like a rhetorical point of view, with the exception of Chris Christie, who had a different kind of rhetorical edge. Vivek Christie, like Chris Christie being kind of the bully, Vivek being kind of the salesman, kind of the Trump era kind of guy, and everyone else was sounding like canned politicians.
Yeah.
From 20.
And a little irrelevant.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say, Vivek, I think clearly everything I've seen, everybody thinks that he was like the clear winner of this, which was my prediction going into it. I also think Nikki Haley actually kind of shined well. Like, I disagree with Nikki Haley, but I think that she did herself a lot of favors in there.
So there's a couple things. So the Fox News and CNN panel both put Vivek as the winner, right? But those are panels. There's like 5 dudes who
It's
just
like a focus group.
who are most interested in showing up to a cable news thing to do a show, right? So that's a very select.
I'd love to be on TV. Yeah.
35-8 polling suggests that DeSantis actually won, right? He was the one who left with the most amount of support. That's the definition of winning in that case.
To me, on the DeSantis thing, I don't think DeSantis lost, but I don't think he really won either. I thought he did everything he needed to do.
Right.
But the thing is that he kind of had the most to lose out of everybody. So I feel like he needed more.
Yeah.
But he did have some really good shining moments that are going to be good clips for his campaign and things like that. He did have those.
And they'll look spontaneous in the clip. It's just in the debate, they didn't look spontaneous at all. It's like, hey, who are you, DeSantis? He's like, we got to end COVID lockdowns. Like, it was so strange. Like, he didn't at all hit the right notes to actually answer questions at points because he was so interested in getting certain sound bites across. That was pretty obvious.
One of the things I will say is that there's a 7-second clip that's been going pretty viral of him that it was put out directly from definitely like somebody from another camp. And it's like him doing an impassioned speech and then giving a very awkward smile at the end. And I actually think that in itself is going to be something that hurts DeSantis.
This is the thing I linked.
We're in meme warfare right now.
I love it.
Under blunders, there was attempt to smile like a human.
Do you have it in here? Okay,
Under
let
blunders.
me grab that.
But let me go over the rest of these stats. So you're right about is Vivek definitely had the second strongest showing according to the poll, and then the biggest mover was Haley, right, who went from relatively low support to gaining support. What I can kind of see there is like the neocons kind of solidified around Haley. More people who were probably Trump support, because Trump actually lost out of the 35-8. Like, Trump loses 6 points.
For not participating.
For not being there functionally. So a lot of people took the pre-poll and then the post-poll, and the pre-poll said I was a Trump supporter. Then they watched the debates and said, hey, I like this guy now. And so they moved to Vivek or to Haley or to whoever. And a bunch of other couple small things moved, but the betting websites still put Vivek at 2, which is the most interesting, reliable indicator, right? Because they're usually the most sensitive to these kind of developments.
At 2%?
No, at the second place.
At second. Okay.
For the Republican primary pick, above DeSantis, which is very interesting.
There were things with Vivek's performance where I could see an argument for like there's a certain thing about Vivek where he had these moments where he kind of gave these broad sweeping criticisms of everybody, like I'm the only one that's not bought and paid for, and like that is a very good from a like kind of a Trumpian style era that we're in perspective. But like the thing that was different between him and Trump is Trump often made those very pointed things where he was kind of like a broad thing where when you do this broad stroking criticism of the entire stage, it's very easy to kind of upset anyone in the audience in that moment. But if you're just like, no, you Jeb Bush, you know, you're bought and paid for by, you know, super PAC guy. But instead he's just like, I'm the only one that's not a super PAC. You know,
right.
Remember
Trump being like, why is Rand Paul even up here?
Yeah.
You know, like that sort of thing. So
that was my favorite moment.
And what did he call Ted Cruz? He had a nickname for Ted. He had a nickname for everybody.
He said his
he always
dad
does.
killed JFK. That's what
To Ted Cruz?
Yeah, that's what he did.
wait, wasn't he the Zodiac killer?
Yeah, the Zodiac killer, but he was also involved in the JFK assassination.
Wow,
that came out of Trump's mouth.
Anyway, so a good example of like the kind of the roboticism that sometimes happens with this, and I'm going to be sympathetic. Sometimes I watch our own podcast, and I'm like, man, I look really weird in that particular moment. But this is what happened with, and this has been going around the internet a lot with DeSantis, and we can check out.
Yeah, here's a memeable moment.
And I will not let you down. And I will not let you down.
One more time.
And like for people who are just listening, it's like this. The command in his brain said, "I need to smile at the end of this," and his body just couldn't. Like, is that how you're reading it?
It was more of a grimace. It's sort of like a.
Well, it's one of those things where a critique that has been levied at DeSantis is that he's very smart. He's a very smart guy. Like he's very well educated and he understands policies very, very well, but he does have a charismatic factor that he lacks sometimes. And I think this is one of those things where he's trying to overcompensate for the charisma factor because he knows it's a problem in his campaign. And then you get these moments like this where he doesn't have the instinctual smile at the right time kind of a thing. I think that's kind of what this is.
I don't see how you don't just. I don't know. Maybe because I'm more charismatic as a person, like naturally, but I just don't see how you find yourself in that moment where you're like smile and your body goes.
This is the thing too. Is there's been these
critical
moments of like people took pictures like during commercial breaks and stuff,
Sure.
and while he was walking around, and there's these moments where he's like really kind of hunched over. And it's because he's wearing these big ass cowboy boots, in there that's making him look taller, right? Because apparently a lot of people say he's probably actually like 5'10", but he's wearing these big ass cowboy boots that are making him look like 6'.
Hey, 5'10" is not short. Okay.
No, but like he's in the middle of the stage presenting himself as very tall, right? And he's wearing these cowboy boots that make him look like he's like 6'2", but he's really like 5'10" probably.
So that the awkwardness is just because he's uncomfortable in cowboy boots.
But apparently he just wears cowboy boots around Florida, which is not the style in Florida.
Well, he's a radical. He's a maverick, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like he's trying to sort of being in the middle of the stage, trying to be this larger than life character. He really is trying to put on that Trump suit, if you will, and fill that role, especially with the lack of Trump. But I will say, if you are just listening to this podcast, this is an episode you definitely want to watch.
We're going to have some good moments.
Because the reactions
videos.
and the looks and everything is just they're really hilarious. So definitely check it out, YouTube or Spotify.
Yeah. So what do we want to jump into first? Do we want to jump into, I know.
Well, let's return to the other dynamic, the overall dynamic, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yes, of course.
So the dynamic, Ramaswamy kind of dominated the stage because he had the most quotable moments. He had the most amount of like, everyone sucks but me type moments, which is very Trumpian, and without Trump being there, it kind of takes up that space in the imagination, and people kind of start looking to him. For example, he said, quote, "I am the only non-neocon on this stage," and we have a good video that we can play. Another one is more people are dying from bad climate change policies than they are from actual climate change. That's a reference from Maui, right? I mean, like these sorts of things. He said, dismantle the FBI and the Department of Education. And he said, quote, "The real choice we face in the primary is this. Do you want a super PAC puppet, or do you want a patriot who speaks truth? Do you want incremental reform, which is what we're hearing about, or do you want revolution?" Which is just a very different tone. And so you have this dynamic where Ramaswamy's talking to everybody, giving everyone a lot of opportunity to attack him. So then he looks like the front runner, because your goal in a debate is to attack the front runner, right? Not to attack the guy who's in third place, aka in this debate, second place. And so DeSantis goes away untouched, basically doesn't lose anything, but doesn't gain anything either, while Vivek looks like the front runner because everyone's attacking him. So we can...
Well, there's an interesting dynamic here of like, I almost wonder, because a lot of the super PAC money that's going to DeSantis and Pence and like a lot of these people, it's kind of a lot of the same people that are kind of supporting all of that. And I almost wonder if you should almost look at it like everything that wasn't, because like DeSantis was entirely positive throughout the entire thing. Like he didn't attack anybody.
And that's
at all.
what you're technically supposed to do as the front runner.
But like, it's one of those things is like, could you almost look at it like everything that Christie said or that Pence said or that Nikki Haley said is just the negative side of the DeSantis campaign attacking Vivek? There could be something like that too, right?
That could be a way. That's like a good lens to think about it because they fundamentally agree. Except for, so DeSantis has been relatively more hedged against Ukraine than the rest of the Republican
He's
field.
wishy-washy on it.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Did he not in this debate say, I don't want U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine?
Yes, but he is still very wishy-washy.
Which is not controversial at all.
Well, it's not. It's not, but it does.
The question
plant...
is, do we want to train F-16 fighters in Ukraine, or to then sell them F-16 fighters, which we are doing right now?
Of course. And we know, we've already talked about how he is very much politically leaving himself in this ambiguous territory to provide himself some outs potentially down the road. But that does at least plant a flag.
Well,
somewhere.
what's so great about it is this was probably the most, everyone's complaining about how the argument that happened, but this was probably more substantial foreign policy in a debate than we've seen a lot of presidential debates as far as foreign policy goes, right? Where Vivek really had to articulate a foreign policy view because he was saying everyone else here is a neocon. And so that forced everyone to actually come out and say what they wanted, except for DeSantis, who just didn't talk.
I can't think of a big foreign policy moment in a debate since Ron Paul Giuliani, really. And that's what, 2008, right?
Yeah, if you look at way back in the day in like 2000, the Bush versus Gore, there was a lot of foreign policy they talked about back then, and it was pretty substantial, and it was way calmer. Right,
but that's
someday we should react to those.
That's
videos.
Bush v. Gore. That's general election. This is primary. So like this shows a clear distinction within the GOP, which is very important. And it's like there's this new era of the Trump foreign policy type, which Vivek really showcased across this debate, and how he is very much part of that Trump blob of foreign policy, and then everybody else, and then DeSantis somewhere in the middle.
The populist right that is closer to the old right than the boomers he's on stage with.
Yes,
which is ironic. But
let's do this Vivek clip right here.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine.
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous, that we are protecting against an invasion across somebody else's border when we should use those same military resources to prevent across the invasion of our own southern border here in the United States of America. We are driving Russia further into China's hands. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat we face. And I find it offensive that we have professional politicians on this stage that will make a pilgrimage to Kyiv, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui or the south side of Chicago or Kensington. I think that we have to put the interests of Americans first. Secure our own border instead of somebody else's. And the reality is, this is also how we project strength by making America strong at home.
So the reason why they feel like they can cut in like that is because there's a debate rule that says if you refer to someone else, you can talk. So when he says everyone else, when everyone else like goes to Ukraine, Pence knew he was talking to him. And
specifically, visiting there, because there were two people on stage that did directly visit, and that was Chris Christie and Pence. Have directly visited.
So then they're like, "Ooh, I get debate time." And one of the things, if you're not a political, you don't know this, and trying to unpack what debates are in politics isn't what people think. People think debates are legitimate efforts to debate each other to discover truth. That's not what debates are. Debates are an effort to create moments to give the impression that you should be the leader. That's what they are. Right. So if it's ideological leadership by making a point or coming across with the right timbre and attitude, like that's probably where Nikki Haley got the most, because she looked like she kind of rose above the pettiness, even as she engaged in it. While Vivek came across like a really passionate person and salesman and someone who was actually interested in what he was talking about and authentic. That's why he got the support I think he did.
I think it's worth noting too is because there were a lot of slings and arrows that were thrown out here, but the first one that made the shot was Mike Pence towards Vivek, which I think does show the interesting perspective here and I believe the very first insult was, we don't need on-the-job training, which pointing that he's 38 years old, right? He's young. Everybody else here is in their 60s and 70s.
Thank you for saying 38's young. I appreciate that, Kyle.
Yeah, Vivek is your age. You guys are the same age.
It's so weird.
Right?
We were born the same year. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, we don't need on-the-job training. We also don't need a president who needs a full-time entourage to show him on and off of a stage, right? So like there may be some balance in between here. But I thought it was interesting. There were some attacks levied Vivek's way after the debate, pointing to a few things that he said, one of which referring to himself as the skinny kid with the funny last name, which was more or less a direct rip from an Obama speech, right? Mm-hmm. Now, was that an intentional allusion to the Obama speech on his behalf, do you think? Or what do we see on that? And does that help him in order to invoke that in front of a bunch of Republicans?
Well, and it is worth saying that Chris Christie also levered that in the debate too. Like first, he specifically said, "I'm sick and tired of these like skinny guys coming up with weird last names. They're saying that they have weird last names. The last person that said that was Obama." And I'm fearful that we just have another Obama clone coming up here. And then Vivek laid out on him and is just like, why don't you give me a big hug? Right? Because there's the infamous moment of Chris Christie hugging Obama like right before the election where Obama won. Right?
And that's what had to do with the hurricane funding and all that kind of stuff.
It had to do with that.
Right.
So that was, and it's one of those things that, like, if you don't remember those history, like those things are going to be missed on you, but like, it's very clear it's just interesting triggers in people's minds.
Yeah, old school, and only like deep political insiders would get all of that background, right? And I don't think anyone that wasn't a political insider remembered Barack Obama introducing himself that way, right? It's just people who are like this. So it's a good example of the kind of advisor class doing their job, which is, hey, you need to say X, Y things about Vivek to make him seem like this. It's another one. You don't have experience because you're not an insider. That directly leverages against his whole point, which is, I'm not an insider. I haven't been the one getting you involved in foreign wars for decades on end, right? So that's why you should trust me. They're trying to turn that into his liability and saying we need someone reliable and trustworthy. And it also relies on a couple key things. They have to avoid looking like bigots because he's Hindu and he's brown. So they have to try to attack him from a different angle, which is he's young. Young people don't vote, but boomers do. So if they say you're young, that's a better attack vector. Now, I don't know if that actually works, right? Because a lot of boomers are tired of other boomers who are running the country in the ground. So it's a good question. Yeah. And I wonder, you think of your parents, would they trust someone your age to run the country?
Well, and it is one of these things too, like there is kind of like, you need the wisdom of the elders, which I think is true. You do need the wisdom of the elders, right? But like, there is something about having youthful energy where it almost feels to me like if you were to play the status game and you have your leader and all this stuff, right? It almost feels to me like you would want your leader to be somebody with youthful energy that has good good elderly advisors around them. That almost seems like the correct combination.
Just like Justin Trudeau and Klaus Schwab, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. Who doesn't want that?
Or like Philippa Macedon and Aristotle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's the archetype.
I like my example better. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com. Okay, but there were a couple of other criticisms of Vivek. I just want to put these out on the table. I mean, he's a biotech CEO, right? He's a billionaire at this point. I think some of the attack vectors from I would call it the sort of the conspiracy community, right? Like on the internet, are pointing at these things and saying, are we really going to put a biotech CEO in a position of power after COVID, after, all this, the stuff with the vaccines and the lockdowns and stuff? Is that really the direction we want to go?
Well, actually, I'll lay this out because we were talking about this before the podcast, because I think the two major things that are being levied at him from the right is that he apparently Soros is funding him. And what happened with that is that when he was a young kid going to law school at Harvard, he got a scholarship that all billionaires fund scholarships. Like, it's just a part of what they do. Like it's their charitable donations. Because
tax write-off.
Everybody does philanthropy for tax write-offs, right? So he got a scholarship that is in the Soros ethos. Like, that's all it is.
Sure.
And everybody's saying that he's funded by Soros.
Well, and I think the second layer of that
and
criticism...
he's like 24 years old at this point, too.
Right. The second layer of that criticism is that he said, ahead of time in another clip to sort of defray this criticism here, that he was, he didn't have a lot of money at the time. However, it has come out evidently that he was, in fact, a millionaire at that point.
Yeah, he had a biotech company at the time, yeah.
But then, David, you made the point that, well, if someone's giving away free money, I don't care how much money I have, I'm going to take it, right? If there's a grant...
If you asked Trump, did you take that tax return? And he was like, yeah. If you ask any business owner...
You'd be an idiot if you didn't.
Yeah, right. And then all of a sudden we say, how dare you? I don't know. Like, don't get me wrong. I do think people should take principled stands. And someone really be something when they take a stand on something. I wonder how many people also got subsidized Pell Grants on taxpayers who don't believe that subsidized Pell Grants should exist.
Well, it's like saying, like, I don't believe in Social Security, but yes, I'm going to take my money out of Social Security.
Right.
Like, of course, obviously. Like, that was a criticism that was levied at Ayn Rand back in the day.
Which, of course, inverts the moral matrix. The moral matrix is whoever uses force is the bad guy, not the person who gets the crumbs of their own labor back to them. Mm-hmm. Right? And don't get me wrong, it's not clear to me. Did he know at the time that it was a Soros scholarship? Maybe not. I don't know. Did he have the political philosophy at the time to be aware of that? Who knows? You got to ask him. So, like, that's the thing that bothers me is if he I just think it's low-level resolution thinking to jump to that conclusion that he must be some conspiracy to convince the right. If you think he comes across as fake, point it out to me. I don't think he does. Like, I just don't read him as being a fake.
I mean, he definitely has a sheen about him that you can
tell.
There's
a salesman
he's very
element.
polished, right? And I think that can sort of confer that sort of vibe to a lot of people.
Specifically in the debate, but he does a ton of long form podcasts, like a ton. And like if he was, and he's doing that much long form podcasting, I think it would come out.
Yeah.
I've listened to dozens of Vivek interviews, and I read his book before he ran for president. Like, I'm pretty confident that he is who he says he is right here. Like, because he was one of the early people on the ESG train before ESGs became part of popular parlance, and it was right around when I was investigating ESG stuff too. I'm confident that he's who he says he is. The other thing that's levied about him outside of the debate stuff, and we'll get back to the debate here, is that he is a World Economic Forum guy. But this is a strategy that the World Economic Forum does, is that they have this like young leaders program where Klaus Schwab just announces future global leaders, and they're people in politics, Fortune 500 like CEOs, all this stuff, and like Putin was on the list. Like they just do a wide swath of trying to bring people into the network, and it's kind of like an invite into the social club. Like Ivanka Trump was on the list, Tulsi Gabbard was on the list, Jared Kushner was on the list. Like, it's wide. AOC was on the list. It's everybody, right? Yeah. And Vivek actually sued the World Economic Forum to take his name off the list. It's like none of these other people have sued them. Like, it's just Klaus Schwab he basically just like hands out an invite. But it's also one of those things where they get to say at the World Economic Forum that we have all these people, but really they don't. It's just like an invite list.
Gotcha.
That's all it is.
Gotcha. So it's not like he is in some way really integrated into the organization per se.
And judging by his book that I read, like, he is very much vehemently opposed to the World Economic Forum agenda. And this was before he ran for president. Now, could this be all like a disguise that he had before he came up? Like, it could be.
I don't think you need to go as far as to say it's a disguise. I think it's very clear that he is calculated. He's very politically savvy and very smart. And I think, if we zoom out on like what his strategy could be in this race, and I think he's almost alluded to it directly, is that, Trump has said, as the front runner, assuming he stays there, he could be picking his running mate from this field of Republican candidates. And I think it looks to me, it seems clear that Vivek is positioning himself as not the opponent of Trump, as not attacking Trump, unlike DeSantis. In fact, defending him in some instances, trying to court the Trump audience and come at this from a perspective of, if I don't win, which he probably won't, I don't know, all bets are off, at least I put myself in the best position to be VP, and then beyond that.
Well, he's also said he isn't doing that, and he's accused of that regularly because he's cultivating the Trump crowd. Now, let me be clear. If you're a Republican politician anywhere in the United States right now and you don't align yourself with Trump, you are making a massive potential mistake. Here's
Absolutely.
Why. Because he's the most popular Republican in the country by a huge margin, universally. Now, so not everyone likes him, but across everywhere you need in order to become president. So he could be doing that, but it's also just as fair to say if Trump gets indicted and is found guilty in time for the election, who's the person who's most likely to be able to take up his torch isn't going to be a person who's going to be attacking him the last 8 months.
Exactly.
So if he's the candidate making the bet that the indictment goes through and that he is now disqualified from taking up the office, how many Republicans are going to switch over to Vivek? That's the question.
And there's an important thing
Vivek.
here too is
Dang it.
Vivek.
My bad, guys. I can't help it. It's E in my head.
There's an important thing in here too of Vivek was an unknown name 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is pretty crazy to watch this meteoric rise right here because like you only really have seen Vivek up before this debate if you're just kind of like a creature of the internet and you follow like political podcasts
Or you
and
listen
stuff.
to our podcast because we've been on them since the beginning, son.
Yeah,
On
that's
top
true.
of it.
Well, and yeah, like I'm a big Vivek fan. Like he's the first politician in my adult life that I've actually been excited by in any meaningful way. I was an adult after the Ron Paul stuff.
Yeah,
so,
I was like, bro.
Yeah. No, where were you? I was in high school. That's where I was. But like Vivek is the first person that I've actually, and it's largely because he's hit the issues that I actually know some things about, which is like the ESG stuff. That is like the thing he's championing.
Well,
right now.
and he has said in his past he was a libertarian, and he did also say on TV that if he were to appoint a Fed chair, it would be Ron Paul or Rand Paul.
Yeah,
and
he
I
did say
felt that one
Oh,
so
man.
much. I was like, yeah. But also I was like, hold on now. Like, he's courting me. He's trying to reel me in.
He's telling you
And
what
I
you
gotta
want to hear.
I got to maintain some objectivity.
He's like, the
here.
only people who care about the Fed are libertarians.
I
He
know.
knows that now.
Yeah,
so.
we have to court that like solid 2% right there.
Hey, man, it makes a difference. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
No, but like it is. Vivek has impressed me a lot. I'm very supportive of him, and I like to see where he's going, especially because I think that he understands. And he understands he's not going to become president unless something drastic happens to Trump. And I don't think he's just like betting on Trump falling. Like I don't think that's his
Well,
bet right
I think it's even odds. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't. I think it's a legitimate strategy.
I think Vivek is actually much more has much more of a sense of like he hopes to be able to make a swerve in directing the Republican Party in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
And if he wins, that's great. Like he wants to win, right?
Yeah.
But like he wants to be able to change things. But he's also going to be here for a long time, right? Like he is in the same way that Ron Paul did. Ron Paul inspired a bunch of young people that had no sway or power or anything, and those Ron Paul kids are now hitting their 40s and they're starting to be able to be more important because they have income, they have all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a generational shift where he's inspiring a lot of young people right now that are going to be important 20 years from now. And I think that's a very important long-term outlook to look at here. And you also have Elon Musk is kind of propping him up quite a bit here too.
Interesting.
That's been cool. Yeah. So we have a couple other the controversy afterwards, not for the right, but for other parts, which is that he said the climate change agenda is a hoax. Vivek did. And then we had people like the ACC, the American Conservation Coalition, which is a center-right group, basically say, no, it isn't. That's so stupid. and then Biden himself actually, said, actually, climate change is real. Right. And this is a subtle change. The climate change agenda is a hoax versus climate change is a hoax. Different.
Well, and this is an important thing too, because and this is something that people got to realize about RFK Jr. actually, because RFK Jr. for a long period of time has been this environmental lawyer, right? And he's always talking about this stuff. But like he'll also go on Jordan Peterson's podcast and say, I think that the climate change agenda is often used towards authoritarianism. Right. And it's used to push towards that. So like this is a very important distinction. You have a guy that's really concerned about climate change, but also understands the politics of it, of this can be this can be drastically bad in pushing towards bad ends.
Yeah.
Right?
Look at the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
Great example.
That's the climate change agenda.
It's the Green New Deal, right?
Yeah. The Green New Deal, climate change agenda, basically saying everyone has to live in an apartment building, climate change agenda, right? Rather than freedom to build. Climate change agenda has all kinds of implications that have nothing to do with whether or not climate change is real. So that pivot there is a direct manipulation, and it's actually really nasty politics because it basically divides the right in a way that's completely silly. One of the first questions, the actual only audience question, was from an ACC kid who came
it
out
was from a YAF kid, Young America's Foundation.
Yeah, but he's also ACC.
He's also
volunteer.
ACC.
They
Okay,
claimed him.
I
They
see.
claimed him. So
I
it
see.
was a deep fake, right? I'm just kidding. I don't know about deep fakes. What are we watching here, Kyle?
That kid didn't exist. Okay, here is the question.
No, I didn't raise my hand. Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax. And we have to declare independence for it. And the reality is, the anti-carbon agenda is the wet blanket on our economy.
So those Republicans are not booing climate change agenda as a hoax, to be clear.
They're booing that he did the blanket. Like, this is like what I was saying before, where
bad strategy.
Yeah, it's bad strategy where Trump is generally much more pointed with his insults, and he did a broad blanket.
What he should have
insult.
done is to say Hutchinson is can't say this, but I can say this, right? Or this person can't say it, even though I'm not sure
who's
any
Hutchinson.
Is the strategy though? Is the strategy though to not punch down, right? Like if Vivek is coming out and trying to position himself as a front runner, he doesn't want to single out anybody because then he's drawing attack directly from them by sort of distributing it. Yes, it's probably a tactical mistake, I think, because he's unifying people in the audience who might be scattered amongst support for all the other candidates. But at the same time, he's not directly singling out anyone to like pull them up the ladder behind him, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Also important, the audience is all donors. Right.
At least
all,
the
it's
first
all
couple
donors to
rows.
respective camps.
According to Glenn Greenwald, the first 2 rows were reserved for RNC donors. Not the entire audience, but the first 2 rows. So, and that's why some of the noise comes out the way it does.
Oh, so the microphones were positioned closer to the donor section.
Yeah.
And so I see.
And he has this whole this is trying to fight this is try to create an anti-populist narrative, because you have all these people who lean populist watching the debates and then saying, oh man, that got booed. Maybe I need to rethink about what I think. Right? Because that's how a lot of tremendous ideas are transferred.
Well, and another thing too is something that we don't have the clip queued up here, but introing into the question, Brett Baer had asked the question of show of hands, raise your hand if you believe humans are contributing to climate change. And I'm really happy that DeSantis did this, because I think that is a terrible question. It is a terribly unnuanced question where I think yes and no on that are both terrible things.
Right.
And DeSantis was like, let's cut out with the kindergarten shit and just cut him out.
good.
And then it actually became a better conversation because DeSantis did that. So I want to give DeSantis credit for that.
For sure. There was some other interesting questions, such as, did Pence uphold the Constitution or did he betray Trump when he authenticated the election? That was really interesting, right? Because it's really strange wording. And here's the thing. In 2020, I kind of missed a lot of this. I saw things going on, but I didn't have the time and the resources really to research this stuff. So I'm trying to get a grip on what exactly is the debate here, because this is also the debate around
The
indictments. And that also relates to the Trump stuff. So we can return to this, but to kind of give you a tease real quick before we return to it, because Trump also covered this, it's strange wording to say, did Pence uphold the Constitution or not? Because the Constitution is tremendously vague in this area. And the entire legal debate question is, what role does the VP play in authenticating the election when there's a doubt about the authenticity of the election? Does he play a purely ceremonial role? Trump called him a conveyor belt. Or does he play an actual managerial role? And the wording itself is vague. So vague that they changed the law in 1877 to try to govern this better. And then they changed it again after 2020, right? Because it still wasn't clear. And so that's the interesting thing about whether or not he's guilty. When it comes to, did he do the wrong thing by saying that this wasn't, that by encouraging sorry, I didn't say that very well. The question is whether in encouraging Pence not to do a certain thing that he thought was constitutional, was he taking away the civil rights of the people who were trying to vote in Georgia? That's the question of the indictment. And that's what they're trying to debate on here, trying to make a debate division on, which is, how do you read this section, this part of the U.S. Constitution and this law from 1877?
Well, and one of the other important things too is I noticed Pence's wording on this. He's Pence in the thing said no vice president has ever exercised the power before. He that was his exact wording on there. He never said that the vice president does not have this power, which is an important thing for the Trump indictment here. But yeah, we'll get to that when we cover the Tucker Carlson interview, because Trump puts it in his own words, which is always Trumpian and fun.
So I have to do my buddies a favor and mention that a major issue in America today was not mentioned at all in this debate, and it's a travesty it wasn't. And that is veteran affairs reform. I mean, the veteran affairs is a freaking disaster. Veterans are dying at this incredible rate. There are known reforms that could make it better. There are policies that Trump passed that have been repealed by the Biden administration, so it makes an excellent Republican talking point. There's so much juice to that squeeze because we have so much admiration for the GWAT veterans who are suffering in this moment. And it was completely ignored, this debate. And it's a real travesty that Fox didn't bring it up, and then no candidate saw the angle and took advantage of it, because so many veterans are out there trying to do the best they can with severe problems and barriers, and the government's not helping them, despite the fact that the government promised to. In fact, they're making it worse. So I got a shout out to that. The guys at Concerned Veterans for America and other veteran organizations were on Twitter all night just raising hell about that, and they have the absolute right to, because it's absurd that we talked about UFOs, right? And I'm a UFO guy, right? I'm open to talk about UFOs, but it's absurd that got mentioned, but not VA reform.
And only Chris Christie got to talk about it.
That's lame.
It was lame. It was lame. Well, there is
He did have a good response to this. Like, I get the UFO question. Come on.
Because I'm from New Jersey? Chris Christie is fun and kind of personable. I despise the man, but he's kind of funny.
Yeah. I'm sure that's how a lot of people feel about Trump too, right? It's like, well, he's entertaining at least.
Well, but then 30% of the country just gets psychotic. It is psychotically deranged.
Well,
which I think is another answer, like another thing in regards to the Vivek, like, because Vivek is kind of like 2016 Trump, like probably even more so than Trump is now these days, where like at least the country doesn't get psychotically deranged about Vivek, right?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I've heard a lot of Republicans, or I've heard Republicans say, God, I wish there was a Trump who just was a little bit like, rounded around the edges, not so blunt and not so off-putting. And I think everybody actually thought that was going to be DeSantis. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it does seem like it's becoming Vivek. Like DeSantis is not filling that role. He's not charismatic. He doesn't really have that energy. He can't smile like a human, evidently. But Vivek is pulling that together.
Right.
And he's an entrepreneur, so there's a lot of parallels. It's really interesting.
100%. I think the problem with DeSantis right now is everybody loved what he did with Florida, but nobody had really ever like heard him talk or anything. So everybody has this like fantasy vision throughout the COVID era about DeSantis, and then when it actually came down to it, the vision of what they had of him and what the reality was didn't match.
It's like a bad Tinder date.
Yeah, everybody has like had this. They're like breaking out of this cognitive dissonance of being catfished on Tinder.
The DeSantis catfish.
Yeah. Everyone swiped right during COVID.
Well,
and then the date actually got set in 2020.
Well, and that's the thing is like domestically, DeSantis is actually pretty solid, right? Like he's pretty good.
I'm sure he's pretty good. The trick is if he actually wanted to win, he would be coming out with an actual restrained foreign policy vision, so he could take up space that Trump doesn't have.
Yeah.
But the problem is he doesn't feel like he can do that because he's going to get flanked by the neocons. So he has to stay in this vague place, and so then nobody trusts him. Right, because if you're someone who's a hawk, you can't you got your option of Pence, and you got tons of options for hawks to give to, and then if you're a dove, right, you got Ramaswamy, and who's actually reliable and actually has a foreign policy point of view, and Trump, and then you got DeSantis. Who are you going to pick? Right,
DeSantis isn't compelling in that comparison.
Yeah.
He just isn't.
So he's kind of put himself in that position. If he really wanted to win, he would articulate a more restrained foreign policy view. And then additionally, I'm doubtful, because of his reputation in Congress, because he was a congressman before he was a governor, that's actually where he's at. He's probably actually just more of a neoconservative on these issues.
Yeah,
and he knows he can't run that way because he'll lose.
Do we want to, since we're on foreign policy and the debate stuff, I do have queued up here Nikki Haley and Ramaswamy going at it on Ukraine too.
All right, fine.
Let's do it.
Because I thought this was some red meat. That's juicy.
But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is a front line of defense. Putin has said once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis, Governor
Nikki,
DeSantis.
I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not
But the
on
fact of the
Lockheed
matter,
and Raytheon, and you
Boeing
went
came off of it,
down
but you've been pushing this
everybody on
lie.
the stage,
You've been pushing
but
this lie all week,
You want
Nikki.
to go and defund Israel? You want to
Okay,
give
let me
Taiwan
address
to
that.
China?
I'm glad you brought that up.
You want to go and give
I'm going to
Ukraine
address
Russia?
each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
I gotta say, this is my least favorite part of debates is when they just shout at each other.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have shows in the pointless wars we've gotten into. I have to address that. So our relationship with Israel.
One of the things that I find interesting there, because like this is a very clear distinction here, and I like it, is everybody's trying to say that you have no foreign policy. No, you have no foreign policy experience because you're too young. Like the youth thing is it's kind of like old school Reagan of when he was saying, I don't want to let my opponent's inexperience make him like look bad or whatever. Like Reagan said that in a debate against someone. And like one of the clear answers here is like, nobody likes your foreign policy, like any of your guys' foreign policy over the last 2 decades. Like everybody thinks you were wrong. And like this is such a clear lane for Vivek to swoop in here, and he says this here, and he's been saying this in the post interviews of everything. It's like Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, like everybody, like the American public's not with you here. Like everybody, like we got lied into the war in Iraq. Nobody's really in support of Ukraine anymore. Everybody's kind of like falling away from that right now, and the polling shows that. And they are still kind of beating these drums of we need more Ukraine funding, right? Like it's interesting.
Well, it is, and I'm gonna take a different approach to this and just say from a consumer standpoint, politics aside, I don't think it was a good idea for Nikki Haley to wear a bathrobe to this debate. If you look at her jacket, if you look at her jacket, it looks like she just got out of the shower, and I just don't know if that really confers a lot of like authority, you know. Plus, she's just blending right in. I mean, this is just me being the visual guy.
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Doesn't work. I'm sorry.
Okay, so a couple of parts of the analysis of what she said. We got the visual analysis. Let's do the content analysis. Now, the setup from Fox is, hey, Nikki, time to attack DeSantis. And she starts doing that. And because Vivek's over there like, nah. He didn't even do that loud too, but you could like hot mic kind of moment. Then she, rather than attacking DeSantis and taking the opportunity to attack the front runner, she attacks Vivek and then doubles down and doubles down. So why, Governor Haley, was Ukraine pro-American? Was Ukraine pro-American? Interesting. Did the current president of Ukraine run pro-American? Did he say what the whole goal here is to be pro-American?
Did Zelensky run as a pro-American?
Yeah. What about the guy before that?
Zelensky's entire campaign was that we were going to sign the Minsk Accords.
Yeah.
That's why he got
Is
elected.
that pro-American? Interesting, because that was brokered by Germany. Right? Yeah. But it is pro-EU in a lot of sense. And then what about the guy before him?
Well,
what about the guy
wasn't he
before
overthrown
him?
in a coup?
Yanukovych.
Yeah, well, so the guy before him was pro-American because the guy before him was pro-Russian, and we overthrew him in a coup, right? And the fact that she can, once again, this is another time slice bias thing, where she tells a story starting at Russia's invasion, doesn't explain anything beforehand, so then you don't have the moral equipment to actually make a real moral calculus. She attacks them on a moral foundation, says it is immoral to support Putin.
Because he's a murderer. Like it's always the same magic words.
Right. As if, sorry guys, I am like suddenly, if there is a case to be made for America to get involved, it has to rely upon you not knowing anything about America's involvement in Ukraine before when the invasion happened. So she can't talk about that. So she has to say they're just pro-American, as if that's all there was to it, as if Ukraine was just pro-American. That does not summarize any country on the planet. Countries aren't divided into the pro-American camp and the Russian camp. That's a dumb way to look at foreign policy, right? So like it's frustrating to me that in that moment, the debater that like if he would have said, hey, why are they pro-American, right? That would have been the Ron Paul thing to say. Right, is that we made them be us way because we dominate them as a country. No wonder Russia doesn't trust us because they don't want NATO, Ukraine in NATO, and they don't want NATO in Ukraine. Right, those kind of talking points. And then additionally, that to go into the Israeli thing, it is nuts to me that a guy can't say, "Hey, maybe we should just support Israel just a little bit less with subsidies." Right, that is such a crazy third rail. I mean, they're a first world country, guys. They're a very wealthy country. I don't understand why we need to support every country, first world country in the world with our dollars. That seems like a reasonable debate. And if you say their country will collapse if we don't support them, that doesn't make any sense. Why? What is the evidence of that? Where do you get this information from? Because they have a very large, very good military. I mean, their military might be better than ours in actually fighting modern troops.
Well, at this point, so most militaries are probably better than ours, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, as far as for first world countries, the question is like and this is interesting. If you go like Colonel Douglas McGregor's stuff, what he's been writing about in the last 3 years has been how, the war on terror, the GWAT, has specialized our military in a very certain direction about very certain conflicts. And we currently probably couldn't fight a war against Russia that effectively right now because they have been practicing how to fight other modern militaries, not to fight insurgencies and, how to avoid traffic, bombs under roads, right? We have a very different skill set right now. So that's not saying, I'm not trying to condemn our military or say there's something wrong with them. What I'm trying to say is that maybe we're not in the best position to start a war with Ukraine or with Russia and China right now. And then additionally, that for her to come out and say, oh man, you have no moral clarity because you have said that maybe we can spend less money on Israel. It's just, you're taxing poor people in America to give to a first world democracy in the Middle East, right? Yep. I mean, like, how's that moral clarity?
And then you wonder
how's that just?
You wonder why people resonate with the ideas of Oliver Anthony in his song,
right?
It's like, obviously.
One clarifying thing on Israel. I think people have an absolute right to support Israel. They have a right to exist. But this idea that there can be no debate about the funding of Israel is just so crazy to me, right? I don't know. I feel like I say that, and it's like I feel like there's like a resistance there, and it's just.
Do you want the terrorists to win, Dave?
Well, and I don't understand.
Like that's the thing, right?
They have some of the largest biomedical companies in the world, right? They have a tremendous arms industry,
which is why Vivek says that I've probably been there more than any of you guys because he's biomed, right?
Yeah. So I just don't. And it's the same. I feel the same way about Germany and all kinds of other countries in the world that I was like, stand on your own 2 feet. This isn't being. He actually points this out. Being friends means mutual. Accountability to each other, an actual like a mutual beneficial relationship, not a parent to a child. And if you actually like these countries, maybe you shouldn't treat them like children.
Well, and there's the old clip from like 20 years ago of Netanyahu. It was filmed kind of privately, secretly, of Netanyahu saying that he has America wrapped around his finger.
Whoa.
Yeah. Maybe I could find it here. But it's like an old like 20-year-old clip. But it is that thing is that there's a very deep religious sentiment about Israel. Mm-hmm. And so we have to defend the Holy Land. And it goes back to old Zionist stuff from World War II. There's a deep philosophical history of this that you could go and
Christian nationalism and all kinds of things. And some of that is completely understandable. Like some people have like a deep emotional attachment because of their religion to the nation state of Israel because they think it's like the fulfillment of prophecy and stuff like that. Okay, great. Does God rely on American taxpayers to subsidize their defense industries?
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf*** the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com.
Any last thoughts that we want to move on before we move on to this Tucker thing?
Yeah, that's good.
I think it's pretty clear. Yeah. We think Vivek was the winner. We
could talk about this the entire time, but we got to go to other stuff. So let's go.
So on the docket also, I'd actually be curious to know what like people did. Like, did they watch the debate first or the Trump interview first? It seems like the Trump interview kind of overshadowed everything. But I believe I saw the ratings on the debate itself were some of the lowest ratings in history.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
On the GOP primary.
Does that include Rumble views?
But that's the thing is I'm not sure about Rumble views because that's actually an interesting thing on talking about new media is Rumble was a live stream there and it was a partnership with Fox, which is kind of interesting, which Rumble is a YouTube competitor. But so while that was going on, Trump had a pre-recorded interview with Tucker and they aired it 5 minutes before the debate and it was an hour long, right? You guys watched it?
Yeah, I watched the debate live and that afterwards.
Same. team.
Yeah.
I was driving, and I listened to the Trump-Tucker interview on my drive, but I did not have a chance to watch the debate prior.
You gotta, yeah.
But it's the biggest interview of all time. That blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like the biggest before this Trump-Tucker thing was
Oprah and Michael Jackson.
Oprah and Michael Jackson, right? Crazy.
Which was 80 million views.
Right.
Right now, I looked this morning, and the Trump-Tucker interview was 255 million views.
Just crazy.
On X, formerly known as Twitter.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wild.
What was your initial thoughts on it?
Well, the question is like, should he gone to the debates rather than doing this? Did this actually do a better job of selling him and selling his brand? Was this the right strategic move? And then I think a different layer of that question is, does the public deserve to have him debate a leader of the existing party? Right, because he doesn't have universal support. He has overwhelming support, but not universal support.
He's winning by 40 points in the primary.
Right.
One of the things there is, I think it is smart strategically to not go. And I think it's good to like wean out some of the like the lessers, like why give them time kind of a thing. And then I think we'll probably end up seeing like Trump, Vivek, DeSantis, Pence, which Trump versus Pence in a debate would be interesting. That would be very interesting.
Quite true.
Maybe like Haley or Christie, and we'll probably bring it down to like a top 5, and that's when we'll see Trump at the debates. Right now, it is probably more worth his time strategically to just do this Tucker thing. And like there's a certain thing of, should he have gone to the debates? Like he almost has a duty to go speak with people, but like he spoke to 250 million people with this.
More people with this.
I'm not sure if that's really an argument.
And a deeper, more like you got a better view of what he thinks than you would at a debate, which is actually probably better for democracy, right? Like
you would think.
You got a better picture of what he actually thinks about things than if he just had a bunch of sound bites and him like shooting back zingers at.
Although my criticism of this interview is, I wish he went into more depth on things. It was very surface. Like there were certain things where he was talking about the CIA and things like that, where he just went super surface level, and I'm very saddened by that. I wish he went deeper on these things. Like he kind of just like skirted around the edges of things.
Yeah. Do we want to do the CIA isn't us part?
Yes.
32 minutes 10 seconds into the interview.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have the thing.
Yeah, that was the problem with this one. We had to X video doesn't allow us to do this quite as easy as YouTube.
I'd call me. It was like throwing a rock into a hornet's nest, into a nest of bees, and the place went crazy.
So when you were president, are you confident that you knew everything, say, CIA was doing around?
No, I'm not. It's a very interesting group of people. I had very good relationships, I thought, but I was a little surprised when I got out that.
Why does it keep stopping there? That's the CIA. CIA trying to keep us from learning the truth.
This is the deep state.
The deep state. Okay.
Control.
You're right. He seems so less Trump.
He doesn't got the juice.
He
doesn't got the juice anymore.
He seems tired.
Or it's just more intimate interview.
Twitter is broken since Donald Trump came back.
That is true. It has been way
legitimately
worse.
when you sent that post when Trump came
Twitter
back,
was down.
Twitter was completely wiped off the earth. I could not access it, and I was like, Twitter's broken. Trump broke Twitter.
I mean, he said the most important thing. Were you aware what the CIA was doing when you were president?
No. What?
I mean, he says actually after that's really interesting too, because he talks about Khomeini and how that was them, but other killings was the CIA, as if he was not in charge of other killings.
Yeah. Well, and it's very important because like prior to this, he's talking about James Comey, and James Comey straight up pulled a J. Edgar Hoover and came in at the very beginning of Trump's administration and was like, "Yo, so we did a bunch of research on you, just so you know, like we'll keep this on the down low, like right." But the Steele dossier did come in for us, and we did see the Russian hooker tapes, like which aren't real. As we do now know,
right?
Which is interesting.
So Comey goes to Trump and says
they weren't real.
No,
you didn't know that?
No, Trump never peed on Russian hookers. That never happened.
Dude, do you not watch the podcast? What the hell?
Jesus Christ,
Jesus, Evan.
What podcast?
I thought we were just hanging out.
He's not even talking into the mic back there. Have you ever done this before? What are you doing?
Is this better?
Yeah, there you go.
He's just swiping on Tinder.
I'm not going to comment.
He's
on
like,
that
Stop online dating and get into the conversation.
He's like, damn. DeSantis just isn't what I thought he was. I got catfished again.
But the important thing here is he makes the case that as president of the United States, that he did not know what the CIA was doing and could not claim full accountability for the killings of the CIA. He says Soleimani was him, but not everybody who was killed under his administration was killed with his approval. That means that the president isn't in charge of the CIA, right?
Yeah.
Am I?
It's like
when you say that, if you have a moment of thinking, "Am I a crazy person?" That makes you the sane person. How could we be a republic where the president isn't in charge of the intelligence apparatus?
We're not.
It's like the Chuck Schumer clip that we showed a few weeks ago. Is the CIA has 7 ways till Sunday to making you kind of like regret this, and it was because Trump was tweeting bad things about the intelligence agencies.
Right.
And like it's so clear that the CIA is like a rogue agency. And a lot of these agencies are, honestly. Like, it's the whole administrative state thing.
Right.
Like, there's this whole managerial class that just does not, like, it's an entirely new branch of government that is allegedly under the executive branch, but it's not really. Like, you can't fire these people. Like, there's entire statutes in the law that you can't pick out individual people and fire them. I do like Vivek's messaging on this, where he talks about how that doesn't apply to mass layoffs, like according to the law. But it is this thing where Trump ran into these roadblocks of realizing he can't actually fire people. He wasn't able to fire Fauci. He wasn't able to fire these people unless you go through these rigorous processes. And, you know, we're taught in our like high school civics class that the president has control over these things, but it's so clear that they don't. Yeah, and that goes into this right here of the Tucker Carlson clip. But apparently, since Donald Trump got off Twitter,
got on Twitter,
it's just not working.
So there are a couple of things I think is worth talking about is the China and Panama Canal stuff. All right, so it's important to set the stage here. So I was hoping to play the clip, but Twitter's not working right now, or X isn't working right now. So basically what he says that back in the day, we built the Panama Canal, we gave it away, big problem, China now runs it. Okay. I want to just like help people understand this a little bit, because it is important when you think about our relationship with South America and Central America and what these things mean when it comes to this stuff. So Panama was an extension of American colonialism at the time. America spent a lot of money and lives to build the canal. He's absolutely right about that. And then, but even in the original document, like letting us build the canal, we gave them ultimate rights to it. We were just going to control it and lease it functionally from them forever. Basically, the Carter administration said, no, you're able to lease it to other people if they bid better than us going forward, starting in 1999. And so he says he sold it for $1. Technically true. It's just we sold the rights to decide who controls the Panama Canal to the people who actually live in Panama after controlling it functionally for like 70 years or 50 years or something like that. So the other a background part of this too is that there's been a pivot in a difference between American diplomacy and Chinese diplomacy over the last 20 years. Since the Clinton regime, we've steadily became less economic in the way we do our diplomacy, right? So we don't come in anymore as much as we used to. And we don't specialize as much as we used to in coming in and saying, hey, what do you need from an economic and infrastructure point of view? And how can we help you build your country? Right? We kind of come in with a very different, like, we're going to overthrow you if you don't do the right thing, or we're going to put all this pressure, all this outside trade pressure on you. Very much more hostile since the Bush administration. And that's including the Obama administration, every administration, the Trump administration, every administration has been much more hostile and less cooperative in this. And I have a great Politico article we can link in here so people can kind of read into that. So Trump shied away from a lot of trade deals in South America while he was president. The Chinese did not, right? The Chinese have kept their very economically focused diplomacy, where they came in and they bidded for the Panama Canal contracts to run the Panama Canal. So now China doesn't own the Panama Canal. The Panama people still do. But the people who have the contracts for actually doing that and actually make money on Panama Canal is the Chinese at the moment. That isn't forever. It's not perpetual. It's just they have the current bid. When Trump was president, that bid was up, as well as other bids, such as a bridge in Panama that would have favored America for getting the Panama Canal Bridge contract. But American diplomats were unable to get American companies to bid for it.
unable to get American companies to bid for it.
Yeah.
Why?
Trump was able to get American companies to do all kinds of things as president, but he didn't make this a priority. Right. We have there's a great couple articles about this.
So what you're saying is he's sort of identifying this problem, saying, oh, if I were to be doing it, it would be different. But really, in effect, he had the opportunity to do it, and he didn't. Yeah,
we could have had a very different relationship with Panama as he was president. He was too busy fighting a trade war with China, maybe understandably, maybe unwisely, but that's the whole point. Like he didn't exactly do as good a job as he seems to claim he did when it comes to these issues when he was president.
Well, I mean, he also mentions in this interview, as far as who he would surround himself with, that he didn't understand Washington very well when he first came in. Now he understands Washington. He understands. I think he made the point that loyalty in business is very different than loyalty in politics. And that's an interesting note to make, right?
I'm glad he recognizes it. He has not shown me, because this is my biggest critique of the Trump administration. It was like from the very beginning where all the people he put in his cabinet in 2017, I was just like, oh, we just got John McCain. Because he put all the people that we as like political we know politics, and we're kind of in the libertarian space too, where we know the baddies that we don't like within the Republican Party, and it was like Trump just decided to pick every single one of the baddies, that like John Bolton and Jeff Sessions and all these people, right? Chris Christie was like basically in charge of his hirings, which is interesting seeing him on the stage now and being such a Trump hater. I need confirmation from Trump in some sort of way that he has actually learned who the correct people are. Like, after he lost the 2020 election, he decided to put in Douglas McGregor as his DOJ chief, like for the last 2 weeks. DOD chief, for like the last like 2 weeks of his administration. Mm-hmm. He was on the list of people at the beginning, but he didn't make it. McGregor is the guy. McGregor is probably the best person from like our perspective of who, like he's not like a libertarian, but like he's just like a realist that understands the costs of these wars, right? Mm-hmm. I needed like a confirmation from Trump in some way of like, yes, I know the people, and I'm not clear on that.
You didn't get it.
He doesn't make it there yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, like it is interesting to see Trump taking any amount of mea culpa for his hirings.
It's very unlike Trump to take any accountability on this stuff.
Right. And he kind of does in the interview, which I actually appreciate. Yeah. Right. I'm like, that's a better thing to not do it. Do we want to talk about the Hunter Biden $3.5 million? And this kind of like a I told you so kind of thing, because even I forgot about the Trump debates in the YouTube video here, and he makes a reference at 1650, Kyle.
X is not working, but we do have a YouTube video from the debates here.
China ate your lunch, Joe, and no wonder your son goes in and he takes out billions of dollars, to manage. He makes millions of dollars. And also, while we're at it, why is it, just out of curiosity, the mayor of Moscow's wife gave your son $3.5 million. What did he do to deserve it? What did he do with Burisma to deserve $183,000?
But it was interesting to me to see he was talking about this, because this is completely confirmed true now with all the Hunter Biden stuff, is that the mayor of Moscow's wife, who is apparently a billionaire, she is some big billionaire in Russia, just so happened to give Hunter Biden $3.5 million for what? We don't know.
Probably some paintings.
It's probably some paintings.
Yeah.
But it goes in. It's the same thing with Burisma. It's the same thing with like these China connections. Is like, and all these things are coming out as true now. But Trump was saying this back in the debates during this time, and it was kind of one of those things. Why would you target the president's son? Right? Mm-hmm. Like that was always what was laid out.
And also, a lot of those sorts of stories need time to breathe as a story, and the press needs to talk about them to support what the candidate's saying. Now, if a candidate says something provocative, the press doesn't talk about it. It's like the candidate didn't really say anything. Well, that's the power of the press. Like you could have the existing president say this is a problem and there's corruption. If the press says, well, he lies all the time, so we're not going to talk about it.
It's worth saying.
It's like the story. It never happened.
It's worth saying too that this is like 2 weeks before the Hunter Biden story was suppressed, and New York Post got banned from everything for publishing it. Right, like this is right in when all of that was happening. It's worth putting that into context.
So it's like it's part of they say like how it could have gone is that Trump said this was a thing. It's then confirmed by the Biden laptop story, and then how much of the population might have voted differently? Right, knowing that Biden's son was influence peddling and substantially millions of dollars payments from foreign nationals while not being registered as a foreign agent.
And adding context to this, Trump in the interview here also said that, no, I didn't really know what was going on at the CIA, or I didn't know all the things right.
Yeah.
And we had the intelligence agencies actively going to the social media companies saying that there's going to be this Russian disinformation story that's coming. Like all these things all the variables start to
add
click
up,
together,
and you start
right?
to feel like a crazy person. You start to feel like everything that everyone talks about isn't real.
And
right, that
and
it's all made up. That's all fake.
And this was me during the election
Yeah.
time, and I felt like everyone around me was just like, "What are you talking about?" Like, and now it's all coming out, right?
Right. Or at least even now, if you say, "Hey, I don't think our country is actually run by the president. It's run by this thing, this blob, this culture, this permanent state that never really changes despite who's in the executive office." You know, like a lot of folks in the liberty movement have been saying this since 2012, right? Or even 2008. And a lot of people have been saying that for a long time. And it would seem even crazier then. But if you don't see it now, goodness, the evidence is right before your eyes, man. Just wake up and look at this thing because it's right there. The former president says, I didn't know what the CIA was doing when I was president. That means we're not a democracy. That means we don't have rule by the people anymore. We don't have popular sovereignty. Because that means the guy who's our elected representative or the Senate, most of the Senate, except for the Gang of Eight, have no idea either. So it's not like the Congress is running anything either. They've delegated all the war powers to the president, and the president has apparently no ability to control what the CIA or other agencies are doing.
It's crazy.
Well, I'm reminded too of when Tucker Carlson dropped the JFK files on when he was still at Fox News. This is like a few weeks before he was gone, or maybe a couple months. The CIA whistleblower that gave him all the information about it, when Tucker asked him, like, was the CIA involved in the JFK assassination? The whistleblower's response was, yes, everything we know is fake. The country is not what we thought it was. Which, whether or not you believe all this stuff, right? Like, that is a very powerful statement coming from a CIA whistleblower, right?
Right, and like your options are either to blank it out. Are you familiar with Ayn Rand's thing, blank out?
Yeah.
Right, is when you have a contradiction in your mind, a cognitive dissonance, you have a choice, a moment in time to choose. Do you accept what your eyes see and what your ears hear, or do you put your head in the sand and do you blank it out? And that's what a lot of people do. They'll find a truth that they cannot reconcile with their model of the world, and it makes them so uncomfortable, they just blank it out. They just ignore it. They just pretend like it didn't happen and they move on with their lives. And for the most part, that's perfectly fine, except for the fact that there's a slow creep of tyranny that is absolutely dependent upon the average person hearing that sort of information or hearing the president say, I killed Soleimani, but a lot of those other people, I don't know. That if you don't react with what the hell's going on here? I want a country that has some semblance of the thing I was promised. And if you don't react with outrage, instead of you just say like, well, I don't know, I don't know everything. You never know, he could be lying, and if you look for reasons not to believe it because it's too inconvenient, it's too difficult to conceptualize that we need intelligence community reform, that we need to change this system, then the system will never change.
I think there's a third option there too. And that is not necessarily apathy or outrage, but it's also like almost just putting your hands in the air. Like, what can I possibly do to affect the fact that the intelligence state is running amok and doing whatever it wants outside of the purview of the executive branch? You can hardly even expect your representative in Congress to represent you as an individual person in this world. So I think a lot of people are probably just like, the hell am I supposed to do about it?
Very simply, know. You can do something about it.
What can I do about it?
You can tweet about it. You can put it on Facebook. When your representative is in Bozeman next week at a Republican women meeting, you go there and you say, hey, what are you going to do about intelligence reform? The frickin' president just said that he doesn't have control over the CIA anymore. That's what you can do. And anyone can do that. In whatever town you're in, you can do that because they're doing town halls all over the place. You just got to get off your ass and go do something. And that's why we started this podcast, is to try to do something to make things better, because things are not okay. All this cultural product will come out like Oliver Anthony and say things are not okay, and people just say like, well, yep, things aren't okay, and I'm going to move on with my life. But you got to do something. You got to spend some time. You got to sacrifice something if you want anything to change.
Or the Beltway tapes will say, why do you have to put out such a negative song? Why don't we talk about positives in life?
Right? Exactly. So do we want to talk about the authentication of the election thing?
The Pence stuff?
Yeah, because I got some clarifying information, I think, if people watch the Trump thing that they should probably know about.
You've always been nice to Pence. I've never heard you criticize Pence. You've defended him in public many, many times. He's out there attacking you. What is that?
So Mike wants to run for president. You got to understand, in my opinion, Mike Pence had the absolute right to send the votes back to the legislatures. The Democrats and everybody said, you don't have the right. In other words, what I said, is he a human conveyor belt? You mean if he finds fraud in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in any of these states, Arizona, he has to send them to Mitch McConnell, right? That's right, sir. Well, if he finds fraud, he has to? Yes, sir. I said, so he's a conveyor belt. Boom, put him in. I said, I don't agree with that. And we had some lawyers, not all, we had some lawyers that said, no, you do have the right to send them back to the legislatures to be rechecked. Because if you looked at what went on in Wisconsin, who, by the way, now agree with me, Wisconsin has been virtually, other than the fact they're not allowed to do anything statutorily, but Wisconsin has been, I mean, what they found is incredible. I mean, we won Wisconsin. But Mike Pence had the right, in my opinion, to send him back.
Do you ever talk to him now?
No, I haven't spoken to him in a long time. I was very disappointed in him. I didn't want to do what Thomas Jefferson did. Thomas Jefferson, it was Georgia, and it was hear ye, hear ye, the great state of Georgia is not capable or allowed to tabulate their votes. And Thomas Jefferson, who was the vice president, said, is Georgia sure that they cannot tabulate their votes? Georgia is sure. He didn't send it back and have them redo it. He said, we will keep the votes of the great state of Georgia for Thomas Jefferson and his president. I didn't ask him for that. Could have done that too, but I didn't. I thought that would bring turmoil. I asked him to send.
This is completely incomprehensible to me for a couple reasons, because it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know what he just said.
All right. So a law from 1877 codified how the House procedure is supposed to work here. But this is how the Article 2, Section 1, Amendment 12 of the U.S. Constitution reads this. The VP presides over the counting of the things. The House and Senate confirm the election was legit. Have to do both. The majority wins. With a tie, the U.S. House decides. That's my reading of Article 2, Section 1, Amendment 12. The question remains is what makes it constitutional, right? So how the legal system works, you have the Constitution, and on top of that you have code, and on top of code you have the judicial decisions about what the code means, right? And then you have executive implementation, which also kind of sits by judicial decision. So how it works is that the objections of each individual state returns must be made in writing at least by one member of the House and the Senate. So say, for example, Wisconsin had objections. You have to have one member say, hey, I'm worried about fraud in Wisconsin from the House, and one from the Senate. They go to opposite chambers and they debate. If they get a majority in both houses of both chambers, then it isn't counted. That's how the 1877 code basically does this. They vote separately to accept or reject the objection, then reassemble in joint session and announce the results of their respective votes. An objection to the state's electoral vote must be approved by both houses, both chambers, in order for any contested votes to be excluded. So what that means is it has to be debated by each one, and then if it isn't conclusive, that's how you get things not counted in the Electoral College. That happened on January 6th, but the Republicans didn't have the votes to get anything excluded. So his point, and this is what's crazy about it, because I looked at this quite a bit. And this has happened before too. In 2005, interestingly, a couple of Democrats, Stephanie Tubbs and Barbara Boxer, objected to Ohio's electoral counts for George W. Bush. All right. So that all happened, and they ended up losing that vote, right? So this isn't, if that happened on January 6th wasn't unique. It's his novel argument that it says that the VP has control over the proceedings, right? And usually what that office of control has a bunch of things you can do according to Robert's Rules of Order and other sorts of institutions that have existed forever in America. When it comes to what kind of things they can hear, what kind of things they can accept from the participants in the meeting that they're orchestrating, right? There's all kinds of bounds around that. Like that existing code, like they're not supposed to be able to delay the meeting or to delay counts or stuff like that, or stay counts. But I mean, ultimately, like, all these things are vague, right? And it isn't always clear exactly what this guy had control over to do. The idea that he could send it back to the state legislatures, I couldn't find anywhere. And I really don't understand where that interpretation comes from. There might be a novel interpretation of somewhere in code that exists. I just couldn't find it. So with that gets down to the core question of the indictment and all the questions that happened at the meeting. Is you have the cultural force that says the election has to be legitimate, because if it isn't, then it draws everything into question. And then you have the fact that in 2022, they reformed the 1877 Act to make sure that it was now clear what the role of the VP is. So, and that he actually says that they actually admitted it because they changed the law. Well, they didn't admit it. They just admitted that it wasn't clear. It doesn't admit that the VP actually had that power, but it does admit that it was unclear that the VP didn't have any power.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can look at it and be like, well, they changed it right before it mattered.
Right after.
Right after.
I think you might have said 2002, but you did mean 2020.
2022, yep.
2020.
Yeah.
Okay. But like,
so in 2022,
right
as part of the continuing resolution / spending package, they reformed the 1877.
Oh, in 2022.
Yeah.
2022.
So 2 years after his election.
Got
So they did that.
Got it.
Interesting. Yeah.
But that was also okay. So this is what's so crazy about this moment, right? The fact that the VP was a ceremonial role was the mainstream interpretation of the current law, right? That's true. But the indictment seems to suggest that just having a novel interpretation of a law is a crime, right? Because they indicted all of his lawyers for saying, hey, we have a novel interpretation. We think this could be a good legal strategy. That is very strange, right? Like you can't make it illegal for lawyers to have opinions, because how do you have law? Right, at that point.
Well, and that's where you get into the mode here of being like, well, what the hell is going on in the country right now, where you're incarcerating lawyers because of opinions that they're going to try to make in court, and the strategy of it, like, because like obviously they have to talk about these things with their client, and they're just hypothesizing things around. And part of this indictment is that he even suggested that it's a possibility that he could overturn the election, right? Like that's kind of the whole premise of this right here.
It's a little stronger than that, I think, though, Kyle. I think they suggested it and then he acted on it. Right, and
but he never really even acted.
He encouraged
stuff,
by encouraging Pence not to authenticate the election.
Yeah, but this is just like a conversation that's being had, right? Like it's like a conversation is illegal.
I'm not on the DA's side here. I'm just saying that it's a little bit stronger than just the theory of having the theory. It's not the thought crime of it. It's them advising
close
him
to the thought crime.
Yeah, it's them advising him to then pursue a legal plan that was illegal, which is strange too, because it isn't. That wouldn't normally be considered a thing you can go after a lawyer for, right? If a lawyer says, hey, when you get up on the stand, if you actually murdered somebody and I'm your defense lawyer and I say, hey, you know what you should do? Not confess to the crime when you're when you have to testify at your murder trial, right? Am I encouraging you to lie? Yeah.
Well, you're encouraging to say nothing.
Yeah.
It's like a lawyer coming in and just being like, my client's not going to speak on anything.
Right.
It's like you don't talk about the stuff while there's an ongoing investigation going on, like because you never know what could muddy the waters.
Right.
Like, that's just like a standard practice, right?
Right. So that's what's so crazy about it, is because we've made it illegal for lawyers to do their job and potentially advocate for novel legal interpretations. That said, it is dangerous anytime you do have a novel legal interpretation of something very crazy like this, like the peaceful transition of power. Right. That's a very sensitive area. Right. So these you can find some fault for them for being overly cavalier. But I think that's the furthest you can go. Right. Well, it's definitely not illegal. Right. I can't imagine how it is.
But here's also the thing: is like, there ultimately ended up becoming like a transfer of power that existed, and we haven't had any and this is where it gets into like January 6th was the worst thing that's ever happened. Even 9/11 was not as bad as January 6th, right? Like, and that is legitimately what people say on CNN and whatnot.
ChatGPT told me that.
Yeah,
I asked what was the worst moment in American history. It said it's January 6th.
And then you ask it not 9/11. It was like, oh, that was pretty bad too.
I was like, no, it actually said, no, you're right. 9/11 was worse. I was like, thank you.
Thank you for.
You're right, but it's also important to note that attempted robbery is also illegal. Right, so just you attempted a robbery, but it wasn't successful, doesn't mean it wasn't illegal.
But then you get into this thing of like Al Gore challenged the like you've had like Amy Klobuchar, I believe her camp back in the 2016 election challenged the Dominion voting systems during Iowa or something,
and that shouldn't be illegal.
And I think Elizabeth Warren did too back in those days. Like there's been tons of like lawsuits levied towards like voting systems and things like that in the past. And it's just like now it's basically illegal to question it, right? Like that's important context in all this too.
I think that's true. And there's also
and Hillary Clinton still thinks that she won the election.
And not every objection to an election is born equally, right? Is like, so him encouraging the VP to not authenticate the election is a different sort of crime than him encouraging the DA of Georgia to not authenticate the election, right? To derelict his duty, right? Yeah. That's more clearly probably a problem, right?
I don't know, like, but like
if he indeed actually did that, I'm just saying he's accused of doing that.
But it's like one of those things. But if you also put it into context of 2016 election of, like we had to go through. The election was a hoax during the 2016 election also, but it was on the other side, right?
Sure.
And we went through legitimately intelligence operations working with the Hillary Clinton campaign on the Steele dossier. Like we were just joking around about the whole Russian hooker story and all that stuff, right? Like that all comes out of the 2016 election, and you had like legitimately intelligence operations that were involved in all this stuff, right? And so you end up having like American intelligence operations directly involving themselves in American democracy and suppressing the Hunter Biden story, which if you do polling on this, if like American public polling suggests that if they had known about the Hunter Biden story prior to it, they would have changed their vote and it would have been enough to change the election.
One of the crazy things is who do you hold accountable for the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? Because it's very clear that Trump is accountable for his actions, right? So you have someone you can hold an indictment for, but can you hold a 40-something former CIA officials for their opinion about whether or not the laptop was
Russian disinformation.
I think the accountability we can have.
I think we can hold the entire blob accountable and just string them all up.
Throw them out.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, take it easy, guillotine. Steve over here. All right, so one other thing that Trump said here is the Thomas Jefferson vice president thing. This is very confusing because he makes it confusing. Thomas Jefferson was VP. Adams, who was actually the opposite party, was president. Because back in the day, the second person on the ticket became vice president.
So you generally had Republicans and Democrats on like the same.
Yeah, the equivalent of that. Yeah. So at this point, Georgia was a new, state to the union, had controversies about their vote, the reporting of which was technically flawed. That it was just reported that it was flawed. It wasn't proven. Jefferson counted the votes, and that meant that Adams was no longer president and Jefferson became president. Because this was a situation that vice president actually running against the president. Right. So I don't know what point he was trying to make there because he didn't want to be Jefferson. But what he's trying to say is that this goes way back and that this is a part and parcel of the problem since the beginning. But I'm not sure that it's I don't think it makes the point he's trying to make.
This is ultimately my problem with Trump is the non-specifics in these long-form interviews typically. That he's not really good at these long-form interviews because he doesn't ever go into specifics.
Yeah, not enough.
And I don't necessarily think that's like a strategy thing. I think that's just generally how he is. He tends to not go into that.
I noticed he spoke in circles a lot too. Like he kept kind of reiterating the same points over and over. And I didn't get the impression that, he wasn't like he's ever been terribly eloquent per se, but he didn't really say very much.
But he doesn't have the juice like he used to. He doesn't have that juice.
Well, that's why you're a Vivek guy now. I see what it is.
Well, I was never a Trump guy. But,
yeah, you were.
No, I haven't voted since 2016 where I voted for Harambe.
You can't do that.
I voted for Harambe in 2016. That's the last person I voted for.
That's un-American.
Harambe is the most American, sir.
If I was going to fake vote, I'd vote for Ron Paul. Come on now.
Yeah. Write in Ron Paul every day until you die.
There was 22,000 people that voted for Harambe.
That's legit.
I always write myself in just in case.
You just want to see just in case.
No, but
you and your mom voting for you.
To defend myself against these I'm a Trumper accusations here.
Everyone knows I'm kidding, right?
What I liked about him is that there's a certain exposing of everything that happened under the Trump administration because he just kind of throws bombs and he says the quiet things out loud often, and Trump really did sway the Republicans into a direction that I do like everything that we talk about the foreign policy stuff, the the Republicans were one way before the Trump time, and then they were another way after the Trump time. And I think that's a very positive development. And a lot of illusions got broken down because of, I think, one, because of the love that a certain side has for Trump, and because of the psychotic breaks that the other side has for Trump. Like, there is a certain segment of the population that just has psychotic breaks when the words Trump are mentioned. Like, you might even just say, like, I have a Trump card, and you're not even talking about Trump, and people will be like, did you say Trump? Right? Like, it shows this like religious division that exists, and I mean like religious in a real way. It was like we have cults forming right now.
I experienced someone gleefully describing watching him get arrested, like with just such joy. It was like they had just seen like their first child born or something. It was like, the fuck is wrong with you?
It's a strange priority.
What? Why?
Like, child being born and Trump being arrested. It's like the two pinnacle moments of life.
But if you've spent the last however many years now just hearing every bad thing about this person, and you see this laundry list of accusations and indictments and this and that, and you have every reason to believe, because it's your tribal affiliation, to believe that this person is guilty of all these things, regardless of whether or not they're actually borne out, which most of them haven't yet. Of course, I mean, I suppose that makes perfect sense. If that's your worldview, of course you're going to think, well, this is something that I need to see happen for justice to be served.
Well, there's a thing too where like all the people I hate slamming Trump makes me want to like Trump more.
That's often how I get there.
That's how it goes.
Right? Yeah.
But I think that's a part of the contrarian nature of most libertarians, is like, if people dislike something enough, it almost just becomes funny to like observe that phenomenon.
Well, most libertarians had a Trump derangement syndrome too. Like, there's like a certain segment of libertarians that didn't, and I got very dissatisfied. Like, one of the reasons why I don't really call myself libertarian anymore is because of like how I think the Trump moment turned libertarians also. Like, there's just this like annoying thing that came out of like a large swath of the libertarian types of like, they had this vitriol towards them too, and it's just like, you're just like falling into your enemy's hands. Like,
well, I think it was almost a fact of like, libertarians had to disavow Trump, otherwise you lose credibility for being, well, I'm partially like this liberal type of person and I'm partially this conservative type of person. If you say, I don't see what's so bad about Trump, immediately your liberal friends are like, oh, well, you're obviously just a Republican in disguise.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, libertarians are fiscally conservative and socially liberal.
If that was your idea of it. I mean, to me, it's
no, that's not my idea of it. I hate that.
If that was someone's idea of it, not you, Kyle. You feel like I'm attacking you. I'm not attacking you. I was actually just kidding.
Fight.
But you know, okay, so a good example, a bunch of the neocons from The Bulwark and from National Review and like all those people started attacking Vivek this week because of the debate. Nothing made me like him more.
Oh, yeah.
All the people,
because if they are afraid of him, that probably means he's a threat to them, and that probably means you should support him. That's not a good reason to support somebody, but it's a reason.
It's a good signal.
It's a good signal, right? Because it means there's something there. That means like they have a reason to oppose.
It's probably a better reason than 70% of why people vote in this day and age anyway, right?
Is because they're voting against someone.
Yeah.
Kind of like I don't
or
like
that's
Trump,
just how they always vote.
Yeah,
I always vote with the letter next to their name.
I think there's a little bit more to it if it's like this person has a particular philosophy that I think is dangerous and bad, and they don't like this person, so I need to give this person a second look. I think that's a completely reasonable way to go about getting your orientation in a particular political arena.
Well, one of the things is like, I found one of my problems with a lot of people that were kind of like the Trump derangement types, where there was like an inability to recognize why Trump became a thing. And everybody just kind of had this like, there's like, it's because people are racist. Or, you know, it's like something like that. And it's like, no, it's because like, all of our politicians and like all of you people that I'm targeting here and what I'm saying, and all of you beltway types that come from like both the conservative and the libertarian types too, like the National Reviews and people like that, they're also like this. They're kind of all part of the cultural blob of DC, right? Like they failed to recognize that like middle America is deeply hurting. People want their jobs back. People and you have this guy coming forward and promising, there's like, all these people are liars, I can do that for you. And they have this big like celebrity businessman that they've known for decades, and they're just like, yeah, let's try the mystery box out. Right? Like
what's behind door number 3?
And he's speaking something to me, right? And it's like, you have to understand, it's not because all of a sudden America just became super racist again. It's not because there's like an influx of neo-Nazis coming through. And like, that's all these types want to just say is like, he's dog whistling to these people. And everybody's just like, well, fuck you. like you don't understand what our problems actually are anymore. And this guy seems to have some semblance of a strategy on this. You know, he's kind of salesman-y, and there is kind of a mystery there, but it's just like, it's better than what all these other options are. Right. And that's what these people were kind of feeling. And that's where the Oliver Anthony stuff comes in. It's the same thing.
Right? For years before Trump, though, there was like the new market is the market of authenticity. And that's where he came across, is because he came across as authentic. And that's why we divided the entire Republican field into who was authentic, Vivek and Christie, who looked bad. Christie has
a different New Jersey thing.
Yeah. He looked authentic in the way that a bully is authentic. Vivek looked authentic in the way that a leader or a salesman is authentic. Everyone else looked like a robot. That's a read. That's a lens to which to view that. And people were tired of the inauthenticity. And Trump looks authentic for the most part for people.
To provide a counterpoint to that, if I were in a position of, let's just say, sort of picking the future leader of the United States, and I wanted to cultivate support from Trump's base to sort of try to disempower Trump to some degree, Vivek would be a great candidate to do that in sort of a reverse psychology kind of way. Make him seem like the outsider. Make him seem like he's this guy that's like really new and, you know, has this novel approach. You know, juxtapose him with all of these establishment politicians, all these neocons. And then really, you know, just essentially use that to siphon the energy into a person or a place that you can control. And I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm saying that if I were trying to pull the strings and be the puppet master, that wouldn't be a bad way to go.
I think a lot of people have views of politics that are like that. And I think a big inner like psychological motivation for that is that they don't really know what it feels like to ever get a win. And so anytime something feels like they're going their way, they have to psychologize for why it's a bad thing. Right? So like there's such a, and I'm not saying that like to condemn them. I'm saying like it's understandable. I mean, you've been losing since 1913.
When you say they, who are you speaking to?
The entire culture of the right and free markets and classical liberalism and, then a guy all these ideas.
And he's like, you're going to get tired of winning.
Right. Or Vivek comes in and sounds very polished and sounds very much and without maybe some of the baggage that Trump has. He's married with kids and doesn't have 3 divorces and the kind of baggage of being a playboy that Trump has. Maybe. We don't know. We don't know Vivek that well.
I think another element here too is like, it seems, and I think a lot of people see this and they're starting to kind of this is becoming part of the American psychology right now, is that there seems to be really like 3 paths going forward. The first one's boring and it's what nobody really wants, and it's the status quo. Nobody wants the status quo. But a lot of these candidates are the status quo, right? So they're instantly 2% in the polls. Forget them. They don't matter. Then you kind of have like, there's a sentiment of like, it's interesting to see coming up in public parlance, you see like the national divorce conversation becoming more popular in public parlance. You're seeing people on the right and the left talking about it. And there's that as like, we might just have to have go our separate ways because these cultures they're not congruent with each other anymore. Or you have, and this is the central piece of Vivek's messaging, is that there needs to be like a spiritual revival and like a common identity that we all kind of come to share again. And that is really this, and in a lot of ways, I kind of think Trump is national divorce. And this is like actually the difference between them. Trump is almost like national divorce, bash on your haters kind of a thing. And Vivek is like, we can all come together again. And that is one area where I think they are actually different. And to me, it seems like the only real solutions here are either everybody comes together again. And that seems like a challenging premise. It's kind of like a Jordan Peterson. We have to have a common story, right? It's very Jordan Peterson-like. Or we just go our separate ways, man. Like, and there's like the secession arguments that come in. Those are decades and decades of work probably towards, but those seem to be how you handle the cultural divides. You either come together or you separate.
Right. And I think for a lot of those folks that look at Vivek right now and their immediate response is he's too good to be true. It's because you've kind of gotten trained by a soft bigotry of low expectations. You expect things to be a lie. And so when something that comes along that's good, you can't differentiate it anymore because you can't differentiate the lie from the truth, right? And that's the entire goal of, not the goal, but the kind of end result of all of the constant state of like what's really true, what's really real, is the media lying to me state that we're in. And I think the only real antidote to that, for at least for the Vivek case, is listen to him. Listen, he's got 2 different 4-hour-long podcasts with Jordan Peterson where he dives into a lot of his personal moral philosophy, and you could learn a lot about the guy from that. And
he has his own podcast
ones.
as part of the campaign too.
Yeah, there's so much content that where if you have those doubts, I think if you dive into it, I wonder how you're going to come out the other side. And it'll be an interesting journey. I'd legitimately like to know what viewers think of that.
Well, and I've legitimately seen one of the biggest arguments from like Silicon Tech Valley crowds is saying that they actually think he's too smart to be president. And you're like, is that like bigotry of low expectations?
Yeah.
Like, there's that right there. I've actually seen like legitimate people saying that about him.
Yeah, I think that was the All In podcast. Didn't they say that at some point?
Yeah, they
like
do.
that?
But
Yeah,
like, there's a lot of people in that crowd.
I wouldn't be
that say
surprised.
that, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I only bring up these objections because I want to maintain a little bit of objectivity about it.
Sure.
Sort of a third-party observational perspective, and I don't want to just put all my chips in the Vivek basket, because as we all come to realize, I think, with time in the political sphere, observing it, voting, wishing and hoping for something, seeing the opportunity in a candidate, and then seeing the reality of the outcome. Even folks who voted for Trump, who expected him to drain the swamp, that didn't happen. And so to me, there's a difference between the idealism of what a guy believes in and who he is and what he wants to do, and then what is actually possible to be done given the framework that they're working within. And to me, it's not. I don't want to be too jaded because I understand that I am as someone who identifies as like a third party, as someone who watched Ron Paul deliver that kind of beautiful message in 2008 and 2012, and just basically get dispensed with by the Republican establishment. I am a little bit jaded, and I recognize that, but I also think there's a realism to it. It just says like, look, it's not that easy. It's not that easy, and I want to maintain a little bit of reality about the situation. To say, I think I like Vivek. I think he has a lot of really great things going for him. It's early, and we're gonna have to just find out how it's gonna go and see where the chips fall.
I have 2 thoughts on what you said there. One, Ron Paul was over a decade ago, and the culture has changed. Right. So like things have changed here. And I think the Ron Paul energy is very alive and it's prospering still. And I think it's like a lot of Republicans are kind of seeing like the error of their old ways and they've changed their minds. Right. So like Ron Paul, unfortunately, was kind of wrong time and place in a lot of ways. But like I said earlier in the podcast, he inspired a lot of young people that still are growing up and will become important in the future.
It's kind of like Back to the Future. It's like it's a little too early, but your parents are really going to love that, right? You know, when he gets up and he plays Buddy Holly. So I think that's a way to think about it. And additionally, that how would you be able to tell the difference between those two, between the candidate that actually came along that was, even if they can't do the thing, they need to say their orientation so you know they're the right person to put in the role to change things so that they could do the thing.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with voting for the guy who you think has the right vision and the capability to achieve it.
Well, and here's one of the main differences between Trump and Vivek that I think really makes me like Vivek a lot more than Trump is Trump is just, let's drain the swamp, but there's no like actual strategy there, right? He might have strategy now, but he still hasn't really articulated well enough for me to like think he has a strategy. Yeah. Vivek actually comes here with like, here are the exact statutes that I would use as my attack vectors for actually draining the swamp. And that's very important because at least he has a plan. Is the plan going to work? But there's at least a plan.
Right.
Like,
absolutely. He would still need 60 Republicans in the Senate, which is hugely consequential on a whole different set of races, right? That's possible in 2024, but not necessarily guaranteed to happen. No. And then he needs a majority of Republicans in the House, which is very doable, right? So Republicans hold a majority and are able to pick up the Senate, and then you have someone like Vivek with enough cultural push, you could have a real change. And it's not saying that's necessarily going to happen. I think a lot of people are so tired of being disappointed, they can't find themselves to be vulnerable enough again to like believe something good could happen. But it is only in the space where we make ourselves vulnerable to the good, to something changing, that something can. Right? Like you never start working out till you show up to the fucking gym, right? So like if you're saying I'm not gonna let myself be hurt again, by another politician, and then you don't, you're never going to get yourself in a situation where you actually find a politician that actually can solve a problem that you want to solve.
Well, and I can't stress enough the thing of like, don't, especially with someone like Vivek, don't think too short term of like, it just matters about this election.
Right.
Vivek is 38 years old. He's going to be around for a while. And a lot of the people that he's going to inspire are literally 20 years old. right now, and they have no power or anything, and those people will eventually run for office, and those people will be inspired. It's the same thing, like the Jordan Peterson moment, like, you know, he inspired all these young people. Like, those people still don't really matter. They were high schoolers that he was inspiring, and like, they're going to be important people later on. Like think large and like generational shifts rather than like 2024. Right? Like, these are important things because like, we're talking about large scale trends that happen over time. Right?
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a really positive note to end on. Don't lose hope. Don't be jaded like me. Vote for who you believe in.
Old man Joe.
but remain skeptical and observant of all things, right? In any case, thank you so much for tuning in to the Vivek Ramaswamy Fan Club podcast.
If you want to donate to his campaign, go to linktree.com/Captain Quigley. I have a link.
By the way, to be clear, Kyle and I still need to have a debate about Ramaswamy's point of view on Taiwan and to see how we actually have it. That's some other point. But
I'm open to that.
We need to talk about that because, like, I've been looking at his view. I think I'm not sure about his view. There's a lot to be said. I'm not in the Ramaswamy fan club, but I'm willing to be. You just gotta get my vote.
Well, and
Vivek,
this idea that
maybe come on the podcast and I'll vote for you.
If this is the thing because you have one disagreement with him, like,
no, I
that's a problem.
What do I disagree with him? I it's hard to say. I mean, overall foreign policy, he has 2 points on foreign policy, 3 points, right?
And you like 2 of 3 of them.
Yes, and I need a foreign policy philosophy, right? That's what will actually get me to like volunteer on your.
I think
campaign.
he has a more realist, like Douglas McGregor type of view, which
and I'm okay. I'm open to a realist and restrained,
which is not a libertarian, non-interventionist view.
Yes,
like a realist Douglas McGregor view is different, right?
Yes. Which is better than a neocon, which I'm willing to settle for
better than
every day of the week.
That's true. That's true. All right. Well, guys, we did a good long recap on this. I hope that you found it valuable at home. If you would like to find us around the web, please do go to Vivek Ramaswamy for President 2024.com. Just kidding. Linktree.com/Human Reaction Pod. Thanks so much for watching. For David Rand, for Kyle Mack, for Evan on the buttons. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Help us fight internet censorship by liking, commenting, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with your friends. To find us around the internet, visit linktree.com/Human Reaction Pod. And remember,
and I will not let you down.